right. On the campaign for apologetics, proper apologetics, know your Bible, and know the peripheral studies that you have to do on secular subjects, like the evolution versus creation arguments. A lot of times, some of these arguments I just given are decades old, and they still work. What about the binary stars? They still haven't resolved the problem. They just avoided it. And the comets, and the amount of dust on the moon, and so on and so forth. Well, Josephus was brought up by one of the Christians in the apologetics class that he joined, he was part of, Mr. McDowell, Sean McDowell, refuted it by saying that Josephus was irrelevant on Jesus, and Jesus is a popular name, a lot of stuff like that. Now, he didn't bother to explain things, so I just Googled it. Paul Maier, professor ancient history. Whether or not he's a Christian, I don't know, we'll find out. Flavius Josephus, AD 37, was a Jewish historian born in Jerusalem 4 years after the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth in the same city. Because of this proximity to Jesus in terms of time and place, his writings have a near-eyewitness quality as they relate to the entire cultural background of the New Testament era. But their scope is much wider than this, encompassing also the world of the Old Testament. His two greatest works are Jewish Antiquities, unveiling Hebrew history from the creation of to the start of the Great War with Rome in AD 66, while his Jewish War, though written first, carries the record on to the destruction of Jerusalem and the fall of Masada in AD 73. A lot of credibility here. Josephus is the most comprehensive primary source of Jewish history that has survived from antiquity and done so virtually intact despite its voluminous nature, the equivalent of 12 volumes, because of imperial patronage by the Flavian empires in Rome, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. Joseph was able to generate the incredible detail in his records, a luxury denied the gospel writers. They seem to have been limited to one scroll each, since the earliest Christians were not wealthy. Accordingly, Josephus has always been deemed an crucial extra-biblical resource, since his writings not only correlate well with the Old Testament and New Testaments, but often provide additional evidence of such personalities as Herod the Great and his dynasty, John the Baptist, Jesus' half-brother James, the high priests Ananias and Caiaphas, and their clan, Pontius Pilate and others. So against his background, we should certainly expect that he would refer to Jesus of Nazareth, and he does, twice in fact. In Antiquities 18.63, in the middle of information on Pontius Pilate, Josephus provides the longest secular reference to Jesus in any first-century source. Later, when he reports events from the administration of the Roman governor Albinus in Antiquities 20-2200, he again mentions Jesus in connection with the death of Jesus' half-brother, James, the Just of Jerusalem. That kind of nails him down. So, yeah, Jesus is a popular name in that language, but it doesn't have a half-brother named James, who's the Just of Jerusalem. These passages, along with other non-biblical, non-Christian references to Jesus in secular first-century sources, among them Tacitus and Suetonius and Pliny the Younger, prove conclusively that any denial of Jesus' historicity is maundering sensationalism by the uninformed and or the dishonest. Exactly the character of this debate between Christians and an atheist. Now, if the Christians were better informed, they would have been able to dismantle everything that he said. And sad to say, the issue was not whether the Christians gave informed questions and answers, but whether or not they were treating the atheist properly. Because the above references to Jesus are embarrassing to such, they have been attacked for centuries, especially the two Josephus instances, which have provoked a great quantity of scholarly literature. They constitute the largest block of first-century evidence for Jesus outside biblical or Christian sources, and may well be the reason that the vast works of Josephus survived manuscript transmission across the centuries almost intact. When other great works from antiquity were totally lost, these remain. Let us examine each in turn. Antiquities 1863. So we go into the details. And where did I get this? I don't have some privileges in a particular library somewhere. I got it online. The standard text of Josephus reads as follows. About this time lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was the achiever of extraordinary deeds, and was a teacher of those who accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Messiah. When he was indicted by the principal men among us, and Pilate condemned him to be crucified, those who had come to love him originally did not cease to do so, for he appeared to them on the third day, restored to life. As the prophets of the deity had foretold these and countless other marvelous things about him, and the tribe of the Christians so named after him has not disappeared to this day. Remarkable, remarkable. But skeptics say, well, that was doctored. So all Josephus' citations, except the text, except the next one, are from P.L. Maier, The Essential Works of Josephus. Although this passage is so worded in the Josephus manuscripts as early as the 3rd century, church historian Eusebius, scholars have long suspected a Christian interpolation, since Josephus could hardly have believed Jesus to be the Messiah, or in his resurrection and have remained, as he did, a non-Christian Jew. In 1972, however, Professor Shlomo Pines of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem announced his discovery of a different manuscript tradition of Josephus' writings in the 10th century, Melkite historian Agapius, which reads as follows at Antiquities 1863. At this time, there was a wise man called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. Many people among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, but those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. Pretty much the same. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion, and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets had reported wonders, and the tribe of the Christians so named after him has not disappeared to this day. So, some minor points here. Let's see. Here, clearly is language that a Jew could have written without conversion to Christianity. Scholars fall into 3 basic camps regarding this one particular citation in Antiquities. The original passage is entirely authentic, a minority position. It is entirely a Christian forgery, a much smaller minority position. And 3, it contains Christian interpolations in what was Josephus' original authentic material about Jesus, the large majority position today, particularly in view of the Agapian text immediately above, which shows no signs of interpolation. So Josephus must have mentioned Jesus in authentic core material in 1863, since this passage is present in all Greek manuscripts of Josephus, and the Agapian version accords well with his grammar and vocabulary elsewhere. Moreover, Jesus is portrayed as a wise man, a phrase not used by Christians, but employed by Josephus for such personalities as David and Solomon in the Hebrew Bible. Furthermore, his claim that Jesus won over many of the Greeks is not substantiated in the New Testament, and thus hardly a Christian interpolation, but rather something that Josephus would have noted in his own day. Finally, the fact that the second reference to Jesus at Antiquities 20:200, which follows, merely calls him the Christos, or Messiah, without further explanation, suggests a previous fuller identification had already taken place. Had Jesus appeared for the first time at that later point in Josephus' records, he would have most probably have been introduced a phrase like brother of a certain Jesus who was called the Christ. So Antiquities 20:200. This is an extremely important passage, since it has so many stunning parallels to what took place on Good Friday, and yet it seems to be largely ignored or in revisionist New Testament scholarship. It tells of the death of Jesus' half-brother James, the Just of Jerusalem, under the high priest Ananus, son of the former high priest Annas, and brother-in-law to Caiaphas, both well known from the Gospels. Josephus' text reads as follows. Having such a character, rash and daring in the context, Ananus thought that with Festus dead and Albinus still on the way, he would have the proper opportunity. Convening the judges of the Sanhedrin, he brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, whose name was James, and certain others. He accused them of having transgressed the law and delivered them up to be stoned. But those of the city residents who were deemed the most fair-minded and were strict in observing the law were offended at this. Accordingly, they secretly contacted the king Herod Agrippa II urging him to order Ananias to desist from any more such actions, for he had not been justified in what he had already done. Some of them even went to meet Albinus, who was on his way from Alexandria, and informed him that Ananias had no authority to convene the Sanhedrin without his consent. Convinced by these words, Albinus wrote in anger to Ananias, threatening him with punishment, and King Agrippa, because of this, deposed him from the high priesthood in which he had ruled for 3 months. So, this Josephus' second reference to Jesus shows no tampering whatever with the text, and it is present in all of Josephus' manuscripts. Had there been Christian interpolation here, more material on James and Jesus would doubtless have been presented than this brief passing notice. James would likely have been wreathed in laudatory language and style, the brother of the Lord, as the New Testament defines him, rather than the brother of Jesus. Nor could the New Testament have served as Josephus' sources, since it provides no details on James' death. For Josephus to further define Jesus as the one who was called the Christos was both credible and even necessary in view of the 20 other Jesuses he cites in his works. So much for a common name that wasn't specifically defined. See, a lot of times when you're an atheist, you don't want to really dig into this stuff. You just go along with the general statements and quote what somebody else told you to say. Accordingly, the vast majority of contemporary scholars regard this passage as genuine in its entirety and concur with ranking Josephus expert Louis H. Feldman in his notation in the Loeb Classical Library edition of Josephus. Few have doubted the genuineness of this passage on James. So, incidentally, I say also Christians should not just quote what they're told to say, but do their own homework and investigate the Bible, as I had done here. And I never went to Christian school, although I did spend some time at seminary learning courses. The preponderance of evidence, then, strongly suggests that Josephus did indeed mention Jesus in both passages. He did so in a manner totally congruent with the New Testament portraits of Christ, and its description, from the vantage point of a non-Christian, seems remarkably fair, especially in view of his well-known proclivity to roast false messiahs as wretches who misled the people and brought on war with the Romans. Furthermore, his citation regarding the attitudes of the high priest and Sanhedrin versus that of the Roman governor perfectly mirrors the gospel versions of the two opposing sides at the Good Friday event. Switch over here at the end here. And this extra biblical evidence comes not from a Christian source trying to make the Gospels look good, but from a totally Jewish author who never converted to Christianity. Okay, so there we got Josephus. A little bit of homework there. Look at evidence that demands a verdict, which is recommended by Sean McDowell, and I have an earlier version, excellent source, so you can quickly look things up, and that's what I find is such a valuable resource. Now the other thing, the Shroud of Turin. Well, how do I know about the Shroud of Turin? Well, first, here's what I don't know and don't have to know. The Shroud of Turin, it proved whatever it says in favor of Christ. What's the point? You have the Scriptures, master them. The authenticity of the Scriptures. How do you authenticate the Scriptures? You don't need the Scriptures authenticated by any place else, but we'll take all the corroboration we can get. However, even with Josephus notwithstanding, the Bible itself, when studied carefully, verse by verse, book by book, in context, language, context, and logic, you'll find it's in a remarkable source, totally trustworthy in what you can prove out, and totally trustworthy in what you have to accept by faith. And if you argue from that standpoint, you know the Bible's reliable? Well, other people say it is. No, I know the Bible's reliable. Why? I spent 30 years and written 35,000 pages of study notes and argued against refutations and looked into the passages that people try to throw out as garbage and find out they're wholly reliable. Taking things out of context is number one. Cherry picking is number two. When you get rid of that, the people leave the room because they got nothing left. They haven't bothered to study the actual words. For example, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and God was the Word, or the Word was God. God was the Word is more accurate in the Greek word